While many writers struggle with the ending of a story, Richard Yates had the ending for Revolutionary Road all planned out before he began working on it. Rather, his predicament came with finding a way to justify the ending he had in mind. A Revolutionary Road would be widely read as an anti-suburban novel, which was not his intention and something he would be disappointed by as its success grew. Now, the protagonists of the book, the Wheelers, may have blamed all their problems on the suburbs, but that was not the way Yates felt about it. That was the character's delusion, not the author's. Now, when asked whether the title of the novel suggested an attack on the system, he replied that it was meant more as an indictment of U.S. life in the 1950s than directly of the system. According to Yates, during the 1950s, there was a general lust for conformity all over the country, a blind, desperate clinging to safety and security at any price, which was only amplified in the political world with the Eisenhower administration as well as Joe McCarthy's witch hunts. Now, while this seemed to be the status quo, many other Americans felt deeply disturbed by what was going on, deeming it a betrayal of freedom as well as the revolutionary spirit that was once held so high. Now, it was this revolutionary spirit that Yates did his best to embody in the character of April Wheeler. Now, another false interpretation of the book is that it criticizes the foundation of marriage. Now, this seems to be a direct consequence of the note literary critic Alfred Kazin wrote to the publishers after reading the book. The letter, which was incidentally a nice one, read, "This novel locates the American tragedy squarely on the field of marriage." Now, the publishers seemed to like the quote and plastered it all over the dust jacket in big red letters. They thought it would make the novel easier to sell along with the cheap, vulgar illustration. Now, Yates, who trusted them, allowed it, something he'd deeply regret later, because despite maybe helping to sell a few more copies, it most likely turned away more intelligent readers. In an interview, he added, "After all, who but a maniac or a goddamn fool would sit down and write a novel attacking marriage? And who'd want to read such a novel?" He, however, did not blame anyone but himself for letting the publishers package the book in such a way. In the midst of writing the book, he attended a party and was asked what his book was about, to which he replied that he thought he was writing a book about abortion. Elaborating on this, he explained that it was going to be built on a series of abortions, from an aborted theater play to several aborted careers to aborted ambitions and aborted plans and dreams, all leading up to the real physical abortion and death at the end. Now, in later years, he would still consider this to be the closest to a real summation of the book he ever had. The novel would also contain what he considered to be the best scene he ever wrote, saying, "The breakfast scene between Frank and April, just before he takes off to work on the day she dies. I always thought that came off nicely. He draws the diagram of the computer on the napkin and she says, 'It's really sort of interesting, isn't it?'" The character John Givings, the mentally ill son of the realtor, however, was not pre-planned. Needing somebody to point up or spell out the story at crucial times, Yates found inspiration in a young man he'd known. Following the muse of this young man, this character, John, occurred to Yates about midway into writing the book. Now, the young man in question was a long-term patient in a mental hospital who had uncannily keen and very articulate insight into other people's weaknesses, which led Yates to create a fictionalized version of him. For this character, nothing was off-limits to shout out or question. Unfortunately, some of the traits of this character would reflect on Yates' own life in his final days. By his final days, Richard Yates saw himself as a failure. All of his books, despite high critical acclaim and copious praise from literary giants like Kurt Vonnegut, Tennessee Williams, and William Styron, never sold very well and quickly went out of print. His 2 marriages failed, he lost custody of his 3 daughters, and he was persistently short of cash. Add to this his struggles with emphysema and bouts of tuberculosis, which led him to losing a lung. As if this list wasn't enough, he was also plagued by depression and only found solace in liquor and cigarettes. Although he was tethered to oxygen tanks, that did not halt his smoking habit. Well, like the character John Giddings, he suffered from multiple nervous breakdowns, which led to hospitalization. Despite the initial success of Revolutionary Road and his own feelings regarding it, it would regretfully be neglected. Along with all his other novels, it went out of print before the end of his life. When asked whether he felt his work had been neglected, he answered that in his more arrogant or petulant moments, he still thought Revolutionary Road ought to have been more famous. He was quite displeased when he heard that it would go out of print. Then, when writer Norman Podhoretz made a very small reference to it in his book years later as an unfairly neglected novel, Yates wanted every reader in America to stand up and cheer. Deep down, however, he knew that kind of thinking was nonsense. After all, it did quite well for a first novel, much better than average. It received generally good reviews, plus it was nominated for the National Book Award. Years later, a great many paperbacks would be sold as well, and it was widely translated and published abroad. Ultimately, however, his view of life's prospects was too brutal to appeal to the genteel literary culture of his time. Meaningless characters leading meaningless lives is how a reviewer for The New Yorker described Revolutionary Road. Yates tried to sell story after story to the magazine, and with each failure asked why John fucking Updike enjoyed the New Yorker's patronage and he did not. Well, finally, fiction editor Roger Angell came clean about Yates' prospects. It seems clearer and clearer that his kind of fiction is not what we're looking for, he wrote snootily to Yates' agent in 1981. I wonder if it wouldn't save a lot of time and disappointment if in the end, if you and he could come to the same conclusion. Again, in his later years, when thinking back to the time following the publication of his first novel and subsequently his first book of short stories, he blamed himself for what followed, stating that what happened after his first two published books was his own fault and nobody else's. He speculated that if he had followed them up with another good novel a few years later and then another one after that, he might have begun to build the kind of reputation some successful writers enjoy. But instead, he tinkered and brooded and fussed for more than 7 years over the book that finally became A Special Providence. Eventually, he couldn't honestly claim that his writings had been neglected. He reasoned that it probably received just about the degree of attention it deserved. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, he reflected on a particular difficulty as he summed it up in his life's work. I'm one of these writers who has the misfortune to write his best book first. Now, the novel has gained more attention in the years following his death, but still has not reached the levels of respect it deserves. In the words of his friend, Kurt Vonnegut, Richard Yates not only gave us compassionate, meticulously detailed portraits of our own flawed selves in fiction, he was also a major player in American history.